Hey there guys, it's Mr. Herbst here, and today's focus is going to be on the evolution that occurs within populations. Now, I like to also refer to this PowerPoint as being the mechanisms at which evolution occurs, otherwise known as what causes evolution. And there are really 5 big things, and we'll discuss those in a second. The first main idea I'd kind of like to lay down is the difference between a population and a species. Now, when I was growing up, I always kind of thought that population was a word that we meant for how many human beings live within a country. Well, actually, the word population just simply means that there is a group of organisms of the same species that live in the same area. So key word is that they live in the same area. So if we take a look at all these deer here, all of these deer are of the same species, and they all kind of live in the same area. Those are a population of deer. A species, another key term here, a species is certain organisms that have the ability to breed and produce fertile offspring. So that means that not only can they first interbreed, for example, a monkey and a whale cannot produce babies, but we have to have 2 organisms that can reproduce, make a baby, and that baby has to have the ability to reproduce as well. So for example, you may know that lions and tigers can mate together and produce something called a liger, but that liger can no longer produce any more of its own babies. So that's why we consider a lion and a tiger to be of 2 separate species. The next kind of key concept I want to go ahead and lay down here, guys, is this idea of a gene pool. The 2 root words there are gene and pool, and so it's sort of like it's a pool of genes within a population. So for example, let's go ahead and talk about a population of rats. Let's say, for example, we have exactly 100 rats within this population. And we find 36% of those rats, otherwise known as 36 of them, are homozygous brown, which means they have two alleles to be brown. And let's say that we find 16% of them, or 16 out of 100, are homozygous black, which means they have 2 alleles to be black. But then 48% of them are heterozygotes for black color, which means that they have 1 of each one of those alleles. And so remember back from basic genetics, which one of those alleles is dominant? Is it black or is it brown? Hopefully you said black. Alright, so last thing I want to talk about before we go ahead and talk about the causes of evolution, I want to talk about this thing called microevolution. Well, microevolution is where we have a change in that distribution or that frequency of alleles within a population. And so it's not per se that we talk about certain individuals evolving. We talk about populations evolving. So we're talking about the gene pool evolving. What do I mean by that? Well, let's go ahead and talk. Let's go ahead and look down here. Let's say that we have 80% green genes within a population and 20% brown genes. Well, 1 year later, we find that there are 60% green genes and 40% brown genes. That means that since there was a change in those numbers, or the frequency, or otherwise known as how often we found the percentage of those genes, since it changed, evolution has occurred. More specifically, microevolution has occurred. Now on to the fun stuff, the causes of microevolution, otherwise known as what causes there to be a change within the gene pool or the alleles that are found within a population of organisms. And one of the biggest contributors to microevolution is simply non-random mating. And non-random mating can be kind of broken down into 2 categories. One of those is inbreeding, and I know inbreeding sort of has that kind of negative connotation with it, but it's actually extremely common. If you consider dogs, how do you make sure that you only have golden retriever puppies? Well, of course you only allow golden retrievers to mate together. That is sort of more or less a form of inbreeding. And also the other thing is selective breeding, where organisms prefer certain individuals over another and only mate with those. And selective mating is extremely common within the within humans. Another cause of microevolution is genetic drift. And when I teach about genetic drift, I like to really use that root word there, drift. If we kind of think about what does it mean to kind of drift around on a raft, well, it means that you're just kind of floating around randomly. Well, genetic drift is kind of like that, where we're not actually floating around with genes, but actually it's a random elimination of genes from a population. So there is a change within the gene pool of a small population that occurs by random chance. And one really good example of that is the bottleneck effect. The bottleneck effect, where we have some sort of event or disaster that drastically reduces population size. And if we reduce population size, we are also reducing all of the genes and all of the alleles that those individuals had. So let's take a look over here. All of the individual colors within that bottle, let's say that those represent certain alleles. Well, if we have the bottleneck effect, where we only can have certain ones come out at the same time, or we otherwise known as, let's say that we have an event that chops off all of those alleles right there, and only a couple get to survive, well, now you can take a look. We have drastically reduced the diversity, or how many of each allele that we have. And again, that happens following certain events or disasters, such as evolution. And the next cause of evolution is what I like to call the founder effect, otherwise known as migration. It is where we have certain alleles change because of a migration of a small subgroup of a population. So if we go ahead and take a look down here, let's say that we have an original population that has all these beetles. Well, if only some of them go off and they go ahead and form a new population, let's say that they migrate to a new island, well, the only alleles that are available on that new island are the ones that originated from these four right here. And so the only babies that can be produced on that new island are these ones right here. Next, here we are talking about mutations. Mutations are awesome. It really is the only way that we can have brand new genes show up within a population. Think about it like this. Random mutations allow for new traits and new things to show up within a population. So it actually is possible that someday a woman could give birth to a glowing baby. But that would require so many mutations that it isn't very likely. Most mutations actually are deadly. For example, cancer is caused by mutations. And so most mutations actually end up killing the organism. And if the organism is killed, they are eliminated from the gene pool. But, again, it also is possible that, 1 in a million chance, there is a possibility that a mutation would be really beneficial to the organism. And if it's really beneficial to the organism, guess what happens? Mother Nature, otherwise known as the environment, loves the fact that that new mutation is really beneficial to the organism. So guess what? That individual is more likely to survive. This is a classic case of natural selection. Natural selection is probably the biggest driver of microevolution that there is. This right here, one of the key concepts to understand in this whole unit, star next to it, bold this, natural selection is the biggest thing to understand in this unit. Natural selection simply is the fact that certain organisms that are better suited or more fit to live in an environment are more likely to live and reproduce, thus giving their genes to the next generation. So favored genes become more frequent within a population over time. Now if we go ahead and take a look down here, these crows here, they love the green beetles. So they're going to go ahead and snatch up all those green beetles. What do you think is going to happen to this population over time? Well, hopefully you can kind of see that if these crows here are eating those green ones constantly, well, the orange ones are going to be the only ones that can survive. So the orange ones here are going to be the only ones that have the ability to kind of get together and, you know, produce offspring. And so eventually, the population of beetles here is eventually going to become more and more orange. Anyway, guys, hopefully you learned a little bit more about the causes or what drives the bus of evolution. This is Mr. Herbst. I'm signing off, folks. Y'all have a nice day.